Alright, we are in lesson 12. Our objective for today says I will be able to use the commutative, associative, and identity properties of real numbers to simplify expressions. Okay, so what you see in your notes is you see all of these different properties. I'm just going to go over them really quickly. They're probably things that you have seen before. Right? The identity property of addition just basically says that when you add 0 to a number, that number doesn't change. 5 plus 0 equals 5. Any number plus 0 is going to give you the number that you started with. It's the identity property because that number keeps its identity. It does not change. Okay? Same thing with the identity property of multiplication, only it is when you are multiplying by the number 1. Any number that you multiply by 1 gives you the number that you started with. Commutative property says that you can switch the order of your add-ins, and that is not going to change your sum. So that means something like this. 5 plus 2 is the same thing as 2 plus 5. You can switch the order, that does not change the answer. So there's a commutative property of addition and the commutative property of multiplication. They work the same way. For all real numbers, when you are multiplying two numbers, you can switch the order of the factors here, and the product does not change. 5 times 2 is the same thing as 2 times 5. Okay? The associative property says that you can switch the way that these are grouped. So just like this, if I've got 1 plus 2 plus 3, I can put a parenthesis around 1 plus 2 if it's all addition. Now this is just with addition right here. This doesn't work with subtraction. Alright? I can put the parentheses around 1 plus 2, or I can put it around 2 plus 3, and I'm going to get the same answer. Same thing with multiplication. I can put the parentheses around 1 plus 2. This doesn't have to be these numbers. It could be 3 times 4 times 5. That's not going to change the fact that this property works, okay? So it doesn't matter the grouping, okay? So the commutative property switches the order, the associative property switches the grouping, and the identity property just says you can either add 0 or multiply by 1, and that number stays the same. So, real simple here. Identify the property illustrated in each equation. 1 times 8, I'm multiplying equals 8. I'm multiplying by 1. The identity does not change, so this is the identity property of, we have to identify what operation we're doing here, so the identity property of multiplication. Alright, identity property of multiplication, because I multiplied by that 1, that did not change the identity of this factor. Alright, here, 13 plus 5 equals 5 plus 13. I switch the order. If I switch the order of my add-ins, that is the commutative property of addition. Alright, I switch the order of those add-ins, but my answer stays the same. Here, I've got 3 times 4 times 7 with 3 times 4 in parentheses, and then here I've got 3 times 4 times 7 with 4 times 7 in parentheses. So I switch the grouping. So if the grouping changes, that is the associative property of, I've got to identify my operation here, multiplication. Alright, so remember, if the order changes, that is commutative property. If the grouping changes, that is associative property. Now let's check here. I've got 12 plus 9 plus 5 plus 9 plus 12 plus 5. So it may look like associative property because you see these parentheses, but what changed here was not the grouping. 12 and 9 are still grouped together. What changed is the order of the 12 and the 9. You flip the order of the add-ins between this one and this one, so that is not the associative property, that is the commutative property. So just because you see commutative property of addition, just because you see parentheses, you might be quick to say, oh, I see a parenthesis, so that must be associative property, but not necessarily. You have to pay attention to what changed. What changed here was not what numbers are grouped together. What changed here between this and this was the order of the 12 and the 9. So let's look at the back. What I see is that this says tell whether each statement is, let's find it. Tell whether each statement is true or false. Justify your answer using the properties. Assume all variables represent real numbers. So basically this wants me to show, using numbers, whether this is true or false. It says GH equals HG. Well, to figure out whether that is a true or false statement, basically I know that this is going to be true because of the commutative property of multiplication, but let's make sure. Let's find any value for G and H. Let's say G is 3. Let's say H is 5. Okay? So if G is 3 and H is 5, that would mean that 3 times 5 has got to be the same thing as HG, which G is 3, H is 5, so that would be 5 times 3. I'm just plugging in values to show that this is true. Well, what's 3 times 5? 15. What's 5 times 3? 15. Alright? So that statement is true. That validates the commutative property. So it says to justify using the properties. So this is the commutative property of what operation? Multiplication. Alright, let's try this. B plus 1 equals B. So is that true? I can't think of a property that would reflect that, but let's check to make sure. Let's just say B is 2 plus 1 equals 2. Is that true? 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 equals 2. Is that true? No. So that is false. Okay? If this were multiplication, that would be the identity property. Multiplying by 1 would work, but not adding 1. This is to simplify each expression, justify each step. Okay? So, how can I simplify this? Can I combine 16 and 3x? No, I cannot. But can I combine 16 and 4? Yes, I can. And the way to do that is to switch the order of the add-ins. So I switch the order of the 3x and the 16. That is the commutative property. Of addition, but we'll just put commutative property for now. And then I can group these two together to show I need to combine these two. 16 and 4 is 20. So 3x plus 16 plus 4 is 20. Alright, and then the fact that I group these together instead of grouping, say, these two together, the fact that I changed the grouping here, that would be the associative property. Okay? Last one, let's look at this. Let me make sure you got that down. Oh, 3x plus 20. That's a plus. Let's make that where you can read it. I cannot combine 3x and 20, so I box in my answer. Right? Same thing here. I want to combine these two, but I want to think about an easier way to simplify this. The commutative property says I can switch the order of these. Since this is all multiplication, I can switch the order of these. It's not going to change the answer. So let's do that. Let's say y times 25 times 1/25. Okay? I switch the order, so that must be the commutative property of, this is multiplication. Another room there. Commutative property of multiplication. Now, 25 is the same thing as every whole number is over 1. So 25 is the same thing as 25 over 1. So I can multiply these two out. 25 times 1 gives me 25. 1 times 25 gives me 25. I got to bring down this y right here. What I did is I said, okay, I can multiply these two. So to show, because remember, when we did order of operations, we said that we're going to multiply from the left to the right. So if it's easier to go ahead and multiply these two out, let's show that with parentheses. Okay? So if I'm grouping those two together, in order to be able to multiply them first, that's going to be my associative property of multiplication. Alright, I group them together so that I can multiply them out first. Now what I know is 25 over 25 simplifies to 1, so that's y times 1, which equals y. Alright, any number times 1 gives you the number you started with. That is the identity property of, I'm just going to put M-U-L-T to represent multiplication, since we are running out of space. Alright, that is it for lesson 12.